The red and blue lights came on without warning. Marcus Hale's knuckles tightened around the steering wheel as the siren chirped once, sharp, impatient, cutting through the quiet stretch of highway. He checked the speed. Exactly 65. Cruise control steady. Nothing dangling from the mirror. No broken taillight. Still, the patrol car hugged his bumper like a threat. He eased onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. The night air smelled like asphalt and pine. Marcus rolled down the window before the officer reached his door, hands visible, heart already thudding too fast for a man who taught federal agents how to keep calm under pressure. The officer stopped short, shining a flashlight straight into Marcus's eyes. "License and registration," he said. Not a greeting, not a reason. Marcus blinked against the beam. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over?" The light didn't move. The officer's jaw tightened. "Step out of the vehicle." A muscle jumped in Marcus's cheek. He obeyed slowly, every movement deliberate, every breath measured. He felt it then, that familiar, sinking awareness, the calculation, the risk, how one wrong tone could turn compliance into suspicion. Cars hissed past, wind tugging at his jacket. The officer circled him like a bored predator. "You fit a description," the officer said at last. Marcus knew that line. He'd heard it in classrooms, in court transcripts, in the quiet confessions of agents who'd survived bad stops. "Of what?" Marcus asked. The officer leaned closer and said softly, cruelly, "Don't get smart with me." Marcus felt something fracture inside his chest. Behind them, the patrol car door creaked open, and the officer reached for his cuffs. Marcus Hale noticed a patrol car before the lights came on. It had been pacing him for nearly a mile, hovering just close enough to feel intentional. He adjusted his mirror, checked the speed again, and kept both hands steady on the wheel. The road was empty except for pine shadows and the hum of tires against asphalt. Then the lights flashed. Red, blue, red again. Marcus exhaled slowly and signaled, guiding the car onto the shoulder with practiced calm. Gravel snapped under the tires. He shut off the engine, rolled down the window, and placed his hands at 10 and 2, visible, still. The night was quiet in that way that made everything louder. The officer approached without urgency, boots crunching, flashlight already raised. The beam cut straight into Marcus's eyes, blinding and invasive. "License and registration," the officer said. Marcus blinked. "Of course." He reached slowly into the glove compartment. "May I ask why I was pulled over, officer?" The flashlight didn't move. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus paused, not in refusal, but in calculation. His pulse ticked faster. He nodded once and opened the door. "Yes, sir." Cold air brushed his face as he stood. The officer took a half step back, hand hovering near his belt. Marcus noticed it. He always noticed. "What seems to be the issue?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice neutral. "You fit a description," the officer said. Marcus waited. "A description of what?" he asked carefully. The officer's mouth tightened. "Watch your tone." Marcus swallowed. Cars rushed past, wind tugging his jacket, headlights streaking like witnesses that wouldn't stop. He felt that familiar narrowing, the world shrinking to posture and breath in the space between him and authority. "I'm just asking for clarification," Marcus said. The officer circled him slowly, flashlight grazing his shoulders, his face, the car behind him. The light lingered too long. "Hands behind your back." Marcus's chest tightened. "Officer, I haven't done anything." The officer stepped closer. "Are you resisting?" "No," Marcus said quickly. "I'm complying." "Then do as you're told." Marcus turned, fingers lacing behind him, every movement deliberate. The cuffs snapped closed, too tight, intentionally so. Metal bit into his wrists. "Why am I being detained?" Marcus asked. "Because you're acting suspicious." The word landed heavy. Backup lights appeared in the distance, flashing against the trees. The officer leaned in close, voice low. "You people always think you know the law." Marcus closed his eyes for half a second. He felt something crack, not loudly, but deep, the fracture of being reduced, of being seen only as a threat. "I know my rights," Marcus said. The officer snorted. That's so. The second cruiser pulled in behind them. Doors opened. Radios crackled. The officer spoke fast, clipped, rehearsed, framing the stop before Marcus could. Driver was evasive, he said. Questioned lawful orders. Marcus stared at the pavement. He knew this language. He taught agents how reports became reality. One of the backup officers glanced at Marcus, then away. Run him, the first officer said. A hand guided Marcus toward the cruiser. His reflection warped in the window, dark skin, controlled face, eyes steady but burning. As the door opened, Marcus made a choice. He stayed silent, because he knew exactly how dangerous the truth could be. And somewhere in the darkness, a radio crackled with his name. The back seat of the cruiser smelled like disinfectant and old heat. Marcus shifted his wrists, metal biting deeper as the door shut with a hollow thud. The window beside him was fog from earlier breath, streaked with fingerprints that never quite disappeared. He sat upright, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He had trained himself not to look defeated in confined spaces. The officer slid into the driver's seat and spoke into the radio. Dispatch, I got one detained for further investigation. For what charge? The dispatcher asked. The pause lasted half a beat too long. Suspicious behavior, the officer replied. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. The car pulled back onto the road. Gravel popped beneath the tires, then smoothed into asphalt. The siren stayed off, but the lights kept flashing, washing the interior in alternating red and blue. Marcus counted his breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow. You know, the officer said, eyes fixed on the road. If you just answer questions, we wouldn't be here. Marcus didn't respond. Silence stretched, thick and deliberate. What? No smart comment now, the officer added. I was advised to remain silent, Marcus said calmly. The officer laughed once. Advised by who? Marcus stared at the metal screen separating them. By experience. The cruiser slowed as they approached the precinct. The building rose in the darkness. Flat concrete, harsh lighting, flags hanging limp in the still air. Marcus felt a familiar chill settle in his chest. Not fear, recognition. The car stopped. The door opened. Out! Marcus stepped onto the pavement, wrists still bound, cuffs now damp with sweat. Officers moved around him without urgency, as if he were an object being processed, not a person being held without cause. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The station smelled like paper, coffee, and something faintly metallic. A desk sergeant glanced up as Marcus was guided forward. What V we got? The sergeant asked. Male subject, the arresting officer said. Uncooperative. Failed to provide clear answers. Possible outstanding. The sergeant's eyes flicked to Marcus. Name. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, then spoke. Marcus Hale. The sergeant typed it in, expression neutral. Date of birth. Marcus answered. The keyboard clacked. A screen refreshed. The sergeant leaned back slightly. And what exactly is a charge? The officer crossed his arms. We're still verifying. Marcus met the sergeant's gaze. Am I under arrest? The sergeant didn't answer immediately. Sit tight, he said instead. Marcus was guided to a bench along the wall. The cuffs stayed on. Time stretched. Officers passed, some glancing at him with curiosity, others with practiced indifference. One younger officer slowed, then looked away quickly, as if eye contact might implicate him. Marcus flexed his fingers, trying to restore feeling. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to classrooms filled with trainees, to his own voice explaining how escalation worked, how authority, once challenged, often hardened. A phone rang somewhere behind the desk. Can I make a call? Marcus asked. Not yet, the arresting officer replied without looking at him. Minutes bled into each other. Marcus watched the second hand on a wall clock jerk forward, marking time in sharp, unforgiving ticks. He wondered how this would be written up, which words would be chosen, which details would disappear. A supervisor finally approached, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard held too tightly. What's going on? She asked. The officer spoke quickly again, rehearsed, stopped him for a traffic inquiry. He got argumentative, refused to explain his presence. The supervisor turned to Marcus. "Sir, were you speeding?" "No," Marcus said. "Did you refuse to provide documentation?" "No." The supervisor frowned. "Then why are you here?" Before Marcus could answer, a beep sounded from the sergeant's computer. The sergeant straightened. He said slowly. "Ma'am." She turned. "There's something you should see." The supervisor walked over. Marcus couldn't see the screen, but he saw the shift, the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his silence sharpened. The arresting officer stepped closer. "What is it?" The sergeant cleared his throat. "Name checks out. No warrants. Clean record." "Then release him," the supervisor said. The sergeant hesitated. "There's more." The officer's jaw clenched. "More what?" The supervisor leaned in, eyes scanning. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Marcus felt it then. The subtle tilt in the room. The recalibration. "What's your occupation, Mr. Hale?" the supervisor asked. Marcus looked at her. He weighed the moment. He had promised himself he wouldn't use it, that he wouldn't have to. But the question hung there, heavy. "I'm an instructor," he said. "Instructor where?" "At Quantico." The room went quiet. The arresting officer laughed sharply. "Yeah, right." The supervisor didn't laugh. She looked back at the screen, then at Marcus again. "FBI Academy," she said softly. A murmur rippled through the station. The officer stepped back. "That's not relevant." The supervisor's eyes hardened. "It's very relevant." Marcus felt a wave of exhaustion roll through him. Not relief, not victory, just a bone-deep weariness of knowing the truth only mattered now. The supervisor exhaled. "Remove the cuffs." The officer hesitated. "That's an order." The cuffs came off. Blood rushed back into Marcus's hands, sharp and painful. He rubbed his wrist slowly. "I'll need a statement," the supervisor said, "and an explanation for why a federal instructor was detained without cause." The officer stared at the floor. Marcus stood, shoulders straight, pulse steady again. He felt the weight of eyes on him. Different now. Careful, respectful, afraid. But the damage was already done, and he knew this was far from over. Marcus sat alone in the interview room long after the cuffs were removed. The room was small and windowless, painted a dull off-white that never quite hid the scuffs along the walls. A single table sat bolted to the floor, 2 metal chairs on either side. The overhead light hummed faintly, a thin, nervous sound. Someone had brought him water in a paper cup and left it untouched near his elbow. He flexed his wrist again. The skin was already purpling. A clock ticked above the door. Too loud, too slow. The supervisor had promised just a few minutes while paperwork was corrected. That had been nearly an hour ago. Marcus knew this delay. It was procedural. They'd say later. Necessary, not punitive. Still, he waited. The door opened briefly. An officer stepped in, young, nervous, eyes flicking anywhere but Marcus's face. "Sir," he said, clearing his throat, "just need you to hang tight." Marcus studied him. "Am I free to leave?" The officer hesitated. "We're almost done." The door shut again. Marcus leaned back and closed his eyes. He felt the aches settle deeper now that the adrenaline had burned off. His mind replayed the stop in fragments. The flashlight glare, the phrase you fit a description, the cold snap of steel around his wrists. He had taught entire courses on how bias hid behind procedure. It was one thing to explain it, another to live it. The door opened again. This time it was a supervisor, clipboard tucked under her arm, followed by the arresting officer. The officer's posture was different now, rigid, defensive, like a man bracing for impact. "Mr. Hale," the supervisor said, "we appreciate your patience." Marcus didn't answer. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "I want to be very clear. You are not under arrest." Marcus met her eyes. "I was handcuffed, placed in a cruiser, detained for hours. What would you call that?" She inhaled slowly. "A detention that went on too long." The officer scoffed quietly. The supervisor shot him a look. "Officer Grant, wait outside." He didn't move. "Now." The officer turned sharply and left, the door clicking shut behind him. The supervisor's shoulders dropped a fraction. "I'm not going to defend how this started," she said, "but I need to document your account." Marcus folded his hands on the table. "Document how?" "Accurately," she said. "From your perspective." Marcus considered her. He had sat in enough rooms like this to know the difference between damage control and accountability. From the moment the lights came on, he said, "I complied." She nodded, pen moving. "I asked why I was stopped. I was given no reason. I was ordered out of the car. I was told I fit a description. When I asked for a description, I was cuffed." She paused. "The officer claims you were argumentative." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Asking questions is not an argument." She didn't disagree. A silence stretched between them. "Do you know how many times I've taught that exact scenario?" Marcus continued quietly. "How many times I've told recruits that tone becomes evidence when you decide it does?" The supervisor looked at him, something uneasy flickering in her expression. "I didn't know who you were when this started." Marcus laughed once, short and humorless. "That's the point." She set her pen down. "Officer Grant's report will be reviewed." "Reviewed?" Marcus repeated. "Or corrected?" She didn't answer. The door opened again. A man in a suit stepped in. Internal affairs by the look of him. Clean haircut. Neutral expression. "Mr. Hale," he said. "I'm Lieutenant Harris." Marcus nodded. "We've been made aware of the situation," Harris continued. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." "Before I leave?" Marcus asked. Harris hesitated. "Yes." Marcus leaned back. "Then I'm still not free to go." Harris smiled thinly. "We're just trying to understand." Marcus stared at him. "Understanding doesn't require confinement." Another pause. Then Harris nodded. "You're right." He gestured to the door. "You're free to leave, Mr. Hale. We'll follow up." Marcus stood slowly. His legs felt stiff, heavy. He grabbed his jacket from the chair where it had been tossed and walked toward the exit. As he passed the desk, he heard voices drop. "That's him." "FBI." "Yeah, Academy Instructor." The words followed him like a shadow. Outside, the night air hit him hard, cold, clean, unforgiving. He stood under the streetlight for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the world widen again. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. He answered. "Hale." "Marcus," a familiar voice said. "It's Deputy Director Collins." Marcus closed his eyes. "I heard about the stop," Collins continued. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Marcus leaned against his car. "It wasn't a misunderstanding." "I know," Collins said quietly. "That's why I'm calling." Traffic moved past the station, indifferent. Marcus watched the lights blur. "There's body cam footage," Collins went on, "and a report that doesn't match it." Marcus said nothing. "We'll need a statement," Collins said, "and your permission to proceed." Marcus opened his car door, but didn't get in yet. "You already have my statement," he said. "What you need is the will." The line went quiet. When Collins spoke again, his voice was firm. "Then let's see where this goes." Marcus ended the call. He slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a long moment before turning the key. As he pulled onto the road, the station disappeared in his mirror, but the night followed him home. Sleep never really came. Marcus lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling as pale light from passing cars slid across the room in slow waves. Every time he closed his eyes, the stop replayed itself. Flashlight glare, the clink of cuffs, the officer's voice tightening with authority that had never been questioned. By morning, exhaustion sat heavy behind his eyes. He showered, dressed, and left the house before the sun fully rose. The drive to Quantico felt longer than usual. Familiar gates. Familiar guards. This time, their nods carried an unspoken awareness. Word traveled fast. In his office, Marcus set his bag down and stared at the framed photos on his desk. Graduation classes. Trainees grinning with that mix of pride and fear he knew well. He wondered how many of them would face a stop like his. How many already had? A knock came at the door. "Come in." Deputy Director Collins stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His face was drawn, jaw set. "They pulled the footage," Collins said without preamble. Marcus nodded. "I assumed they would." "It's worse than the report," Collins added. "Tone, language, escalation without cause." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That doesn't surprise me." Collins sighed. "Internal affairs is involved. So is the department's legal team." "And the officer?" Marcus asked. "Administrative leave," Collins said. "Pending investigation." Marcus felt no satisfaction, just a dull confirmation of what he already knew. "They'll circle the wagons," Marcus said. "They always do." Collins met his gaze. "Not this time." Marcus studied him. "Why?" "Because the footage is clean," Collins said. "And because you're not just anyone." Marcus's mouth tightened. "That shouldn't matter." "I know," Collins said quietly. "But it does." Later that day, Marcus was asked to provide a formal written statement. He sat in a quiet conference room, typing slowly, choosing each word with care. Facts over feelings. Sequence over speculation. Still, emotion bled through. When he finished, he read it once, then twice. It felt thin compared to the weight of the night. He submitted it anyway. By afternoon, rumors were circulating online. A blurry phone video from a passing car had surfaced. Just enough to raise questions. Comments piled up fast. Some supportive, some venomous. Marcus avoided them. His phone rang again. This time it was a reporter. "No comment," Marcus said and hung up. The next morning, the story broke. "FBI instructor detained during traffic stop," the headline read. The article was careful, restrained, but the implication was clear. The body cam footage hadn't been released yet, but sources confirmed it contradicted the officer's account. At the precinct, the mood had shifted. Officer Grant sat in a small office, hands clasped tightly, staring at a wall that suddenly felt too close. A union representative spoke in low tones beside him. Down the hall, supervisors moved quickly, voices tight. "This is going to be reviewed at the highest level," the chief said during a closed-door meeting. "We need consistency in messaging." Grant looked up. "I followed procedure." A captain met his eyes. "Procedure doesn't look like this." Grant's jaw clenched. "He challenged me." "He asked questions," the captain replied. "That's not a crime." Grant leaned back, folding his arms. "Now everyone's acting like I'm the problem." Silence answered him. Back at Quantico, Marcus stood in front of classroom again. The trainees watched him closely, sensing something different in his posture, his voice. He adjusted his notes, then set them aside. "Today," Marcus said, "we're going to talk about traffic stops." A murmur rippled through the room. "Specifically," he continued, "about how they go wrong." He didn't mention his own experience. He didn't have to. The lesson carried more weight than any anecdote. Authority, Marcus said, is not the same as control, and control is not the same as safety. He let the words settle. That evening, his phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from colleagues, from former trainees, from people he didn't know. One text stood out. "We tried to tell them before." Marcus stared at it for a long time. 2 days later, the body cam footage was released. The video spread fast, faster than statements, faster than explanations. People watched the flashlight linger, heard the shift in tone, saw the cuff snap closed. The line, "You people always think you know the law," became a headline. Public response exploded. The department issued a statement expressing concern and commitment to review. Protesters gathered outside the precinct with signs and cameras. Officers were ordered not to engage. Grant stayed home, watching the news in silence, his name scrolling beneath footage he no longer controlled. Marcus watched too, from his living room, lights off. His phone rang. Collins again. "They're reopening prior complaints," Collins said. "Patterns are emerging." Marcus closed his eyes. "How many?" "Enough," Collins replied. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. The house was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Exposure didn't feel like justice. It felt like standing under a spotlight you never asked for, while the system decided what was willing to admit. And Marcus knew the hardest part was still coming. The complaint form was 14 pages long. Marcus scrolled through it slowly, the cursor blinking like a dare at the first empty field. Each section asked for precision, times, locations, exact wording. There was no space for what the moment had felt like. No box for humiliation, or the quiet fear that sat in the chest long after the cuffs came off. He began anyway. Date of incident, location, officer name. His fingers paused over the last one. Grant. Typing it made the night feel closer. Marcus wrote carefully, sticking to verifiable facts. He described the lights, the stop, the lack of explanation. He quoted the officer's language exactly, sparingly. Each sentence was a controlled burn, designed to illuminate without exploding. When he finished, he sat back and rubbed his eyes. The sun had shifted across the room without him noticing. A knock came at the door. His sister, Denise, stepped in, worry etched deep in her face. "You okay?" He nodded once. "Working." She glanced at the screen. "That's a lot of paperwork for something that shouldn't have happened." "That's how it works," Marcus said. "The burden always shifts." She leaned against the counter. "You don't have to carry this alone." Marcus smiled faintly. "I know." Later that afternoon, Marcus submitted the complaint through the official channel. An automated confirmation appeared instantly. "Your submission has been received." No name, no voice, just procedure. The next call came from a department attorney. "Mr. Hale," the man said, tone smooth, practiced. "We appreciate your cooperation." Marcus waited. "We're conducting a thorough review," the attorney continued. "In the meantime, we advise discretion." "Discretion about what?" Marcus asked. "Public statements," the attorney replied. "Media engagement can complicate matters." Marcus exhaled slowly. "So can silence." The attorney chuckled softly. "Let's handle this." Marcus hung up without agreeing. Across town, Officer Grant sat in a conference room with his union representative and a legal advisor. The body cam footage played silently on a screen behind them. "Your report contradicts this," the advisor said. Grant crossed his arms. "Perspective matters." "Facts matter more," the advisor replied. "You wrote that he was aggressive." "He was," Grant insisted. "He questioned me." The union rep leaned forward. "The language you used, evasive, non-compliant, those are red flags." Grant's face flushed. "So now we're punishing officers for doing their jobs?" "No," the advisor said. "We're holding them accountable for how they do them." Grant looked away. That evening, Marcus attended a closed meeting with federal leadership. The room was filled with familiar faces, all serious, all careful. "This case is gaining traction," one official said. "We need to be strategic." Marcus folded his hands. "Strategic for who?" "For the institution," the official replied. Marcus met his gaze. "Then you're already losing the point." Silence followed. A younger agent spoke up. "With respect, sir, this is bigger than optics." Marcus felt a flicker of something like hope. The meeting ended without resolution. The next morning, Marcus woke to a notification. Internal Affairs investigation expanded. He read the article slowly. Prior complaints against Grant were being re-examined. Stops that had ended without charges. Warnings that never escalated. Patterns. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time from a woman he didn't recognize. "My name is Angela Torres," she said when he answered. "I was stopped by Officer Grant 3 years ago." Marcus closed his eyes. "What happened?" "He searched my car without cause," she said. "Told me I was lucky he was letting it go. I filed complaint. Nothing happened." Another call followed. Then another. Each story was different. Each was the same. Marcus listened until his chest felt too tight to speak. At the precinct, pressure mounted. Supervisors fielded calls from city officials. The union issued a statement defending due process. Protesters returned, louder this time. Grant watched from his television, anger simmering. "They're turning me into a villain," he muttered. His wife looked at him. "Did you do what they're saying?" Grant didn't answer. Back at his desk, Marcus drafted a second statement. This one not required. A personal account. He didn't submit it. Not yet. That night, Collins called again. "They're offering mediation," Collins said. "Quiet resolution." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "And the officer?" "Reprimand." Collins said. "Mandatory training." Marcus closed his eyes. "No. No." Collins repeated. "No." Marcus said again. "That's not accountability. That's insulation." Collins sighed. "This would get ugly." Marcus stared at the darkened window, his reflection staring back. "It already is," he said. When the call ended, Marcus sat alone, the glow of the city stretching out below him. He thought of his trainees, of the stories that had poured in, of the report still open on his screen. He knew the system would test his resolve, and this time he was ready to test it back. The footage went public on a Tuesday morning. Marcus didn't watch it at first. He didn't need to. He already knew every angle, every pause, every inflection in the officer's voice. Still, his phone began vibrating before he reached the parking lot. Text stacking on top of missed calls, notifications lighting the screen like a warning flare. By noon, it was everywhere. Cable news split the screen between the video and talking heads. Social media dissected each frame, slowing the moment the cuffs clicked shut, freezing on the officer's hand, hovering near his weapon. Commentators argued over tone and intent, over whether procedure excused what people were seeing with their own eyes. Marcus finally watched it alone in his office. Door closed. The flashlight glare washed the screen white. His own voice sounded steadier than he remembered. The officer's sounded worse, sharper, smaller. The line, "You people always think you know the law," hung in the air like a bruise. Marcus paused the video and leaned forward, elbows on his desk, breathing slowly until the tightness eased. By afternoon, the department released a statement. "We are committed to transparency and accountability." Marcus read it twice. It said nothing, and it said everything. Outside the precinct, the crowd returned, larger this time. Signs lifted high, phones held higher. The chants weren't angry at first, measured, deliberate, but they grew louder as the day wore on. Grant watched from behind his curtains. His name trended online, paired with words he didn't recognize himself in. He scrolled until his hands shook, then threw the phone onto the couch. "They don't know me," he said aloud. No one answered. At Quantico, leadership convened an emergency meeting. The room felt smaller than it had days ago. "This is now a national story," one official said. "We need to be careful about public alignment." Marcus sat still, hands folded. "Alignment with what?" "With facts," the official replied. Marcus looked up. "Then start there." Another official cleared her throat. "There's pressure from the city, from the union, from elected officials." Marcus nodded. "There always is." When the meeting ended, a younger instructor caught up to him in the hallway. "Sir," she said quietly, "thank you." Marcus stopped. "For what?" "For not letting this get buried." He studied her face, earnest, tired, hopeful. "It shouldn't take this much," he said. "No," she agreed. "But it does." That evening, Marcus finally spoke publicly. Not on television, not at a podium. He wrote. The statement was measured, personal, unadorned. He described the stop, the silence, the moment his identity shifted how he was treated, and what that revealed. "This is not about one officer," he wrote. "It's about a system that only corrects itself when power is exposed." The post spread faster than he expected. Messages poured in support, gratitude, anger. Some accused him of exploiting his position. Others thanked him for using it. He read until his eyes burned, then stopped. The next morning, Internal Affairs announced preliminary findings. Policy violations identified. Grant was formally suspended. At the precinct, officers gathered in tight clusters, voices low. Some defended him fiercely. Others stayed silent. A few looked relieved. Grant sat across from investigators, jaw clenched. Do you regret your actions? One asked. I regret how this is being portrayed, Grant said. The investigator scribbled a note. That wasn't the question. Grant stared at the table. At home, Marcus's sister watched the news with the volume low. They're talking about you like you're a symbol, she said. Marcus sat beside her. I didn't volunteer. She nodded. Symbols don't usually get a choice. That afternoon, Marcus received an invitation to testify at a public oversight hearing. He stared at the email for a long time. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Officials sat stiffly at the front. Community members filled every seat, some standing along the walls. Marcus waited until his name was called, then walked to the microphone. He took a breath. I'm not here because I'm an FBI instructor, he began. I'm here because I was a citizen stopped without cause. Murmurs rippled through the room. I complied. I stayed calm. And it didn't matter until my job did. He paused, letting the words land. That's the problem. Questions followed, some respectful, some pointed. Marcus answered carefully, refusing to speculate, refusing to soften. When he finished, applause broke out, then quickly died as the chair called for order. Outside, reporters waited. Marcus didn't stop. That night, Grant sat alone at his kitchen table, papers spread out before him. Complaints he'd never read closely before. Names blurred together. Faces he couldn't recall. For the first time, doubt crept in. Marcus, meanwhile, stood on his porch, the city humming beyond the trees. He felt drained, exposed, but also steady. Public record was a powerful thing. Once written, it didn't forget. And neither did he. The hearing room felt heavier the second time. Not louder, not angrier. Heavier, like everyone inside it understood now that something irreversible was happening. The cameras were still there, but they mattered less. The real audience sat in the first 3 rows. People who had learned, slowly and painfully, how consequences worked only when pressure refused to fade. Marcus took his seat behind the long table, nameplates centered in front of him. He rested his hands flat on the surface, grounding himself in the cool wood. Across the room, Officer Grant sat beside his attorney. He looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Not physically, just diminished. His uniform was gone, replaced by a stiff suit that didn't quite fit his posture. He avoided Marcus's eyes. The chair called the session to order. Internal affairs presented first. Charts appeared on screens. Timelines. Numbers. Stops clustered in familiar neighborhoods. Discretion applied unevenly. Complaints dismissed as unsubstantiated. Until now, a low murmur moved through the room as patterns formed where excuses once lived. Officer Grant, the lead investigator said, had 14 complaints over 8 years. Grant's attorney shifted. None sustained, he said quickly. Because none were reviewed in context, the investigator replied. That has changed. Marcus listened without expression, but his chest tightened with each data point. Every dot on the graph represented someone who had gone home carrying the same weight he had, or worse. When Grant was called to speak, the room went still. I did my job, Grant said, voice tight. I followed my training. The chair leaned forward. Your training does not permit detention without cause. Grant's jaw clenched. I made a judgment call. And when confronted with evidence that your judgment was flawed, the chair asked. Grant hesitated. I stand by my instincts. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Marcus was called next. He stood slowly, adjusting the microphone. He didn't look at Grant. Not yet. I want to be clear, Marcus said. This is not about punishment. It's about accountability. He turned slightly, addressing the panel. When authority refuses to interrogate itself, harm becomes routine. Complaints get buried. Patterns get normalized. He paused, then finally looked at Grant. And people learn that compliance doesn't guarantee safety. Grant stared back, something raw flickering across his face. Anger, fear, maybe recognition. It vanished quickly. Questions followed. Hard ones. Do you believe this officer acted out of bias? Marcus chose his words carefully. I believe bias shaped his perception of threat, and perception shaped his actions. Do you believe termination is appropriate? Marcus inhaled. I believe consequences should match impact. And impact doesn't disappear because intent is debated. The hearing lasted hours. When it ended, the decision was announced. That wait was worse. Outside, the crowd was quieter than before. No chanting, just watchfulness. Phones lowered. Conversations held in low tones. Marcus stepped into cool air and felt the exhaustion hit all at once. His legs trembled slightly. Denise appeared beside him, handing him a bottle of water. You okay? She asked. I will be, Marcus said. Across the steps, Grant exited through a different door, flanked by his attorney. Reporters called out questions. He didn't answer. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. Not from fear this time, from anticipation. From the knowledge that decisions were being made in rooms he wasn't in, by people who would frame consequences as necessary, overdue, or regrettable depending on who was listening. The call came the next afternoon. Marcus, Collins said, voice steady. They've reached a determination. Marcus closed his office door. Officer Grant will be terminated. Collins continued. Certification revoked. The department is forwarding findings to the State Review Board. Marcus sat down slowly. And policy, he asked. Mandatory changes to stop documentation. Independent review triggers after multiple complaints. Body cam audits. Marcus nodded. Good. A pause. They want you present for the announcement, Collins said. Marcus exhaled. I'm not the headline. No, Collins agreed. But you're the reason. The press conference was brief. The chief spoke carefully, emphasizing standards, commitment, reform. The words were familiar, but this time they were attached to action. Grant's name was spoken once. Then Marcus was invited to the podium. He didn't prepare remarks. I didn't want this, Marcus said simply. I wanted to go home that night. Silence held. But if something good comes from this, he continued, it should be that no one else has to earn safety by proving their worth. Questions followed. Marcus answered none. At home that evening, he sat at his desk, lights dim, the city quiet beyond the window. He opened an email he hadn't touched in weeks, the personal statement he drafted and never sent. He reread it. Then he closed it. Some truths belonged to the record. Others he carried himself. Across town, Grant packed his belongings into a cardboard box. Uniform pieces folded carefully. A badge wrapped in cloth. He paused, staring at it for a long time. For the first time, the room felt silent enough to hear his own thoughts. Marcus, meanwhile, opened his lesson plan for the next day. He added a new line at the end. Authority is tested not when it is obeyed, but when it is questioned. He saved the file. Tomorrow, he would teach again. And this time, the lesson would land differently. The quiet that followed surprised Marcus more than the noise ever had. No sirens, no chants, no cameras waiting outside his door. Just a steady rhythm of ordinary days returning, cautious and incomplete. Consequences had been announced, policies rewritten, statements archived. The story moved on, as stories always did. Marcus stayed. On his first morning back in the classroom after the decision, he arrived early. The hallways were empty, lights dimmed to half power, the building breathing in its own familiar way. He unlocked his office, set his bag down, and stood for a moment without moving. His wrists no longer hurt. That didn't mean the memory had softened. The trainees filed in quietly. They didn't chatter the way they usually did. They watched him, waiting, not for instruction, but for permission to speak. Marcus didn't rush. Before we start, he said, resting his hands on the lectern, I want to acknowledge something. No one shifted. No one checked a phone. What happened to me could have happened to any one of you, he continued. And it will happen to some people you meet in the field, whether you notice it or not. A hand rose in the second row. Sir, a trainee said carefully, how do you keep doing this work after all that? Marcus considered the question. He felt its weight, not curiosity, but concern. You don't move past it, he said. You move with it, and you decide what it changes. He began the lesson, not with slides, not with definitions, with a scenario, A stop, he said. No probable cause. Just instinct. What happens next? They answered thoughtfully, slowly, differently than before. At lunch, Marcus sat alone in the courtyard, sunlight warming the stone bench beneath him. He scrolled through messages he'd saved but never answered, voices from across the country. Stories offered like proof that what happened to him was not rare. He didn't respond, not because they didn't matter, but because he knew now that listening was part of the work too. That afternoon, an envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single page, typed and signed. I saw what happened to you. I wish someone had done then what you did now. Marcus folded it carefully and tucked it into his bag. Weeks passed. The department implemented its changes with the slow gravity of institutions trying to look decisive. Training modules updated. Review boards expanded. Audits scheduled. None of it felt like closure, but it felt like movement. Marcus testified one final time, this time behind closed doors, helping design curriculum that didn't just warn against bias, but demanded accountability when warnings were ignored. He spoke plainly. He refused euphemisms. He made them sit with discomfort. At home, the nights grew easier. Not quiet, but steadier. Denise visited often, bringing food he didn't ask for and conversation he didn't always need. They sat on the porch, watching the sky change color as traffic hummed in the distance. You look lighter, she said one evening. Marcus smiled faintly. I'm not carrying this alone anymore. She nodded. That helps. One night, long after the headlines faded, Marcus received an email from a former trainee. Sir, I was on a stop tonight. I remember what you said. I slowed down, asked myself why I felt threatened. It changed everything. Marcus read it twice. Then he closed his laptop and stepped outside. The air was cool. The city was quiet in that temporary way that never lasted but always returned. He stood there, hands in his pockets, breathing in the ordinary. Across town, Officer Grant's name was no longer spoken on the news. He had taken a job that didn't require authority. The uniform was gone, the certainty with it. Some days were easier than others. Some nights were long. He avoided mirrors more than he used to. Consequences, Marcus had learned, weren't always loud. Sometimes they were just permanent. On the anniversary of the stop, Marcus drove the same stretch of highway at dusk. The light softened the trees. Traffic moved smoothly. No patrol car followed him. He pulled over anyway. Just for a moment, he stood on the shoulder, listening to the wind, feeling the ground beneath his feet. He wasn't reclaiming the space. He didn't need to. He was acknowledging it. When he got back in the car, his phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Lecture, authority and accountability. Marcus smiled. At the podium later that evening, he didn't mention the stop. He didn't need to. The room knew. The lesson had already traveled. Through footage, through policy, through quiet conversations that didn't make headlines. Authority, Marcus said, closing his notes, is not proven by how often it's used. He looked out at the room, faces attentive, thoughtful. It's proven by how carefully it's restrained. The room was silent, not in fear, but in understanding. When the session ended, Marcus gathered his things and walked out into the night. The world didn't feel healed. It didn't feel fixed, but it felt awake. And for the first time since the lights had flashed behind him on that empty road, Marcus felt something settle into place. Not relief, not triumph. Resolve. The kind that stayed. The quiet that followed surprised Marcus more than the noise ever had. No sirens. No chants. No cameras waiting outside his door. Just a steady rhythm of ordinary days returning. Cautious and incomplete. Consequences had been announced. Policies rewritten, statements archived. The story moved on, as stories always did. Marcus stayed. On his first morning back in the classroom after the decision, he arrived early. The hallways were empty, lights dimmed to half power, the building breathing in its own familiar way. He unlocked his office, set his bag down, and stood for a moment without moving. His wrist no longer hurt. That didn't mean the memory had softened. The trainees filed in quietly. They didn't chatter the way they usually did. They watched him waiting, not for instruction, but for permission to speak. Marcus didn't rush. "Before we start," he said, resting his hands on the lectern, "I want to acknowledge something." No one shifted. No one checked a phone. "What happened to me could have happened to any one of you," he continued. "And it will happen to some people you meet in the field, whether you notice it or not." A hand rose in the second row. "Sir," a trainee said carefully, "how do you keep doing this work after all that?" Marcus considered the question. He felt its weight, not curiosity, but concern. "You don't move past it," he said. "You move with it, and you decide what it changes." He began the lesson, not with slides, not with definitions, with a scenario. "A stop," he said. "No probable cause. Just instinct. What happens next?" They answered thoughtfully, slowly, differently than before. At lunch, Marcus sat alone in the courtyard, sunlight warming the stone bench beneath him. He scrolled through messages he'd saved but never answered, voices from across the country. Stories offered like proof that what happened to him was not rare. He didn't respond, not because they didn't matter, but because he knew now that listening was part of the work too. That afternoon, an envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single page, typed and signed. "I saw what happened to you. I wish someone had done then what you did now." Marcus folded it carefully and tucked it into his bag. Weeks passed. The department implemented its changes with the slow gravity of institutions trying to look decisive. Training modules updated. Review boards expanded. Audits scheduled. None of it felt like closure, but it felt like movement. Marcus testified one final time, this time behind closed doors, helping design curriculum that didn't just warn against bias, but demanded accountability when warnings were ignored. He spoke plainly. He refused euphemisms. He made them sit with discomfort. At home, the nights grew easier. Not quiet, but steadier. Denise visited often, bringing food he didn't ask for and conversation he didn't always need. They sat on the porch, watching the sky change color as traffic hummed in the distance. "You look lighter," she said one evening. Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm not carrying this alone anymore." She nodded. "That helps." One night, long after the headlines faded, Marcus received an email from a former trainee. "Sir, I was on a stop tonight. I remember what you said. I slowed down, asked myself why I felt threatened. It changed everything." Marcus read it twice. Then he closed his laptop and stepped outside. The air was cool. The city was quiet in that temporary way that never lasted but always returned. He stood there, hands in his pockets, breathing in the ordinary. Across town, Officer Grant's name was no longer spoken on the news. He had taken a job that didn't require authority. The uniform was gone, the certainty with it. Some days were easier than others. Some nights were long. He avoided mirrors more than he used to. Consequences, Marcus had learned, weren't always loud. Sometimes they were just permanent. On the anniversary of the stop, Marcus drove the same stretch of highway at dusk. The light softened the trees. Traffic moved smoothly. No patrol car followed him. He pulled over anyway. Just for a moment, he stood on the shoulder, listening to the wind, feeling the ground beneath his feet. He wasn't reclaiming the space. He didn't need to. He was acknowledging it. When he got back in the car, his phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Lecture, authority and accountability. Marcus smiled. At the podium later that evening, he didn't mention the stop. He didn't need to. The room knew. The lesson had already traveled. Through footage, through policy, through quiet conversations that didn't make headlines. Authority, Marcus said, closing his notes, is not proven by how often it's used. He looked out at the room, faces attentive, thoughtful. It's proven by how carefully it's restrained. The room was silent, not in fear, but in understanding. When the session ended, Marcus gathered his things and walked out into the night. The world didn't feel healed. It didn't feel fixed, but it felt awake. And for the first time since the lights had flashed behind him on that empty road, Marcus felt something settle into place. Not relief, not triumph. Resolve. The kind that stayed. The road looked ordinary. Two lanes stretching into the distance, bordered by trees just beginning to turn with the season. The sky hung low and gray, promising rain but not yet delivering it. Marcus drove with the window cracked open, cool air brushing his face, the hum of tires steady beneath him. He hadn't planned the drive. Some days, movement was the only way to think. At a red light, a patrol car pulled up beside him. Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The instinctive inventory. Speed. Signals. Hands. Breath. The light turned green. Both cars moved on. Marcus exhaled, slow and deliberate, and kept driving. Later that morning, he arrived at Quantico earlier than usual. The campus was quiet, mist clinging low to the grass, buildings half hidden like they were still deciding whether to wake up. He parked, sat for a moment, then stepped out of the car. A new class started today. Inside the lecture hall, trainees filled the seats, voices low, energy contained but restless. Marcus stood at the front, watching them settle. They were younger than he remembered being. Or maybe he just carried more now. He began without ceremony. Before we get into the syllabus, he said, I want to talk about responsibility. The room stilled. Not responsibility as a rule, Marcus continued. Responsibility as a burden you agree to carry, even when no one is watching. A hand rose. Sir, the trainee said, what happens when the system doesn't support that? Marcus nodded. Then responsibility becomes harder and more important. He clicked to the first slide. Power without reflection is just force. He let the words sit. Throughout the day, Marcus taught as he always had, measured, demanding, precise. But something had shifted. The examples landed deeper. The questions were sharper. The silences longer. The room was learning how to listen. That afternoon, Marcus met with a small group of instructors to finalize updates to the training curriculum. They debated language, argued over definitions, pushed back on comfort. Marcus listened more than he spoke. At the end, one instructor leaned back and sighed. This is going to make people uncomfortable. Marcus met his gaze. Good. The instructor nodded slowly. You've changed how we do this. Marcus shook his head. We did that together. That evening, Marcus went home before sunset. He cooked a simple meal, ate slowly, and sat by the window as the light faded from the sky. The city beyond his street hummed with its usual indifference. Cars passing, voices drifting, life unpaused. His phone buzzed once. A message from a former trainee. I pulled someone over today. For a real reason. I explained it clearly. They left without fear. I don't think I would have done that the same way before. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Then he replied, That matters. Night settled fully. Marcus stepped outside, the porch light casting a soft circle around him. He leaned against the railing, listening to the quiet. It wasn't the kind of peace that erased memory. It was the kind that coexisted with it. Across the city, policies continued to be tested. Some officers adapted. Some resisted. Change, Marcus knew, was never clean, never complete. But it was possible, and possibility was enough to keep going. A week later, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a national conference. He declined the keynote and accepted a smaller panel instead. Less spotlight, more conversation. On the panel, he listened as others spoke. Community leaders, legal scholars, officers trying to do better within systems that often pulled them backward. When it was his turn, Marcus said only this. Justice isn't a moment. It's maintenance. The room was quiet, not stunned, not impressed. Understanding had a different sound. On his way out, a young man stopped him near the exit. My dad was stopped like you, the man said. Years ago. Nothing happened after. Marcus nodded. I know. But this time, the man continued, something did. Marcus placed a hand on the man's shoulder. That's how it starts. Later that night, Marcus drove again. The same highway. The same stretch of road. No lights behind him this time. No siren. Just motion. As he passed the spot where it had all begun, he didn't slow down. He didn't look away either. He drove through it, present, steady, unafraid of remembering. The road curved ahead, disappearing into darkness and possibility. Marcus kept going, not because everything was fixed, but because he knew now, deeply, unshakably, that his silence was no longer the price of safety. And that was something worth carrying forward. The tires hummed, the night opened, and the road finally belonged him again.